What's good, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to SK Wealth Academy podcast number 116. Financial news of the horrific and parasitic for July 13th to the 17th. Yes, I have not yet released SK Wealth Academy podcast number 113, 14, and 15 as of yet. But I will. The reason I'm releasing this one a little bit out of order is because this is going to be a new series for me. So I'm going to release a wrap up of exactly what it sounds like, financial news of the horrific and parasitic every single week. It's going to be a new feature. I'll do this once a week so you can stay up to date about the coming global system financial implosion and what you need to do to protect yourself. Now, before I get started, please do hit the subscribe button below if you're watching this on YouTube. And also, I'm going to get started with a personal story. So as a lot of you know, I've been locked down, unable to get to my home destination for over 110 days now. And I had some financial transactions that needed to be completed, and it required a friend of mine in another country in Asia. And he got back to me and said, hey, I can't do this for like 3 weeks, because he told me any amount that a new money laundering rule has been implemented in the nation where my friend is, saying that any amount that is sent that is significant, and get this, significant means anything over $15. That's correct, not $15,000. $15 is considered significant, that it requires a government approval process to ensure that money laundering is not going on, because God knows if you send like $1,000 and it's money laundering, then it's going to ruin the nation. So anybody, it's not even 1,000. The limit is anything over $15 that's sent outside the country. It requires a 2 to 3 week approval process before it can be sent. Now, why is this important? This is important because I've been saying this for many years now. And I've been saying that anyone believing that these viral lockdowns are about stopping viral spread and protecting the health of the world's citizens has to be among the most naive of naive people in the entire world. Now, for some people's tendencies to dismiss any narrative that says the viral lockdowns are about economic control of the global population, such as my own narratives that I've spoken in the past about this topic, as a conspiracy theory, only points to the extreme naivete of such people. And I don't just say this because I believe someone that disagrees with my view is automatically naive. That would just be a narcissistic opinion. I say that because there is a mountain of evidence that supports my view. So again, for those that are new to my channel, you can just visit my new site at malamalama.com, which I'll put in the show notes below, as well as the references to all the stories I'm going to talk about. I'll put them in the show notes, which you can see on YouTube by clicking on the show more link. You'll see all the show notes for this podcast. Just look. So my new site again is malamalama.com/WordPress. Just look at the predictions I made in the past 9 months. And I challenge you to find anyone else in the entire world that's had a string of predictions better and more accurate than the ones I've provided there about the exact events that have unfolded over the past 9 months, whether it's price movements in gold and silver, because I've been doing this since 2006. And when U.S. central bankers, but just go back in the last 9 months, you don't need to go back and look at 14, 15 years of history I have of accurate predictions, which I will put my record up against anyone in the world, and I would challenge anyone to find someone with a better track record of predicting things that have come true. But just look in the past 9 months, that's a good enough time frame, right? Because when U.S. central bankers were stating early last year that they were going to raise Fed funds rate over 3.25%, I was the first one to state just a few days later that they were liars. I was the first one in the entire world to say that, and that they would cut interest rates back to 0% eventually. And then when I saw that coming, even before March of this year, when they had the emergency meeting to cut interest rates to 0%, I said that the interest rate cut all the way down to 0% was imminent. So not only did I predict it 9 months ago, I predicted it just a couple of weeks before it actually happened. And then I also stated the U.S. stock market at the end of last year would crash to start this year. And that happened. I've been stating for years now as well that by the end of 2020, I thought that bankers and politicians, being the parasites they are, would collaborate to ratchet up and limit our access to our own money and our ability to do what we want with our own money under the guise of fighting money laundering, to increasingly restrict the movement of our own money across international borders. And that I said that might make moving to another nation impossible by the end of this year. So I said that years ago, that by 2020, by the end, it might be impossible to move to another nation, or near, not impossible, because there's always ways to circumvent and get around increasing restrictions that limit our financial freedom. But if you don't transfer your savings out of the nation via the banking system before the end of this year, if you're considering moving to another country, you might need to do it by cryptocurrency or by precious metals to get your money out of the country. And then I wouldn't be surprised by the end of this year that the G8 nations make it illegal to move physical gold and silver out across international borders. Again, using the whole money laundering excuse. Oh, drug cartel members use gold now to transfer their money, so we're going to make it illegal for anyone to move even the smallest amount, to move even 1 gram of gold across international borders. And if you think that's crazy, just go back to what I just told you. There are nations in Asia now that say you cannot move $15 outside of the country without a 2 to 3 week approval process for certain citizens in that nation. Now, granted, the friend I was dealing with has a well-known corporation in that country, so this isn't for I don't believe it's for every citizen that is subject to those restrictions, but still, that is insanity and absurdity to the highest degree that's going on right now. So remember that the whole banking cartels push worldwide to take away coins and cash from us and subject us to 100% digital money, which would allow complete financial enslavement of the entire population of planet Earth, was based upon, again, that fraudulent narrative of saying, oh, this is to really attack those that are money laundering out there. Now, if you think about that for a second, politicians and bankers are the biggest money launderers in the entire world. So you know that reason is not honest for that restriction of financial freedom. So, okay, before I get started too, I want to let you know that my Patreons that receive exclusive financial commentary every single week and 2 extra bonus long format podcasts, at least 20 to 40 minutes long, every single month over what I release publicly. I just provided them option strategies that cleared a minimum of $1,000 profit for anyone that goes in. So that's a pretty good ROI, I think, on an investment of the price of a cup of coffee to become a patron, because you get access to most everything for just $5 a month. So if you're interested, go to patreon.com/skwealthacademy. So let's get started on the financial news of the horrific and parasitic. First news item up is that Deutsche Bank to pay $150 million fine to settle charges linked to Epstein dealing. So why does that not surprise me? Now it says Deutsche bankers admitted to a quote unquote critical mistake taking on the registered pedophile Jeffrey Epstein as a client. Now that's a complete joke, because let me just review the history of Deutsche Bank, okay? Now, I used to be a private banker more than 15 years ago, and as a private banker in America, I was told there's certain industries you can't do business with. Gambling was one. Surprisingly, even gambling in Las Vegas, we couldn't do any business with casinos. Pornography industry, of course, was one. But look, think about this. Jeffrey Epstein was already a convicted pedophile. So they're saying pornography is out of the question. But child sex traffickers, that's okay. You can do business with them. And also, Deutsche Bank has been one of the worst offenders as far as crashing gold and silver prices, which they admitted in court. So don't call that a conspiracy theory, because I was tired when I was saying this for decades. People say, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist, because they admitted in court guilt to crashing gold and silver prices in the futures market. And they were one of the worst offenders in doing that. And similarly, think about this. Back all the way to 2008, when all the banks got a lot of clapback for all their criminal behavior that was exposed through all their leaked emails and communications within their firms. The Deutsche Bank CEO, I can't remember his name, but I specifically remember, he sent an email that went viral to all employees of Deutsche Bank saying they had to clean up what was a systemically criminal environment at the bank. But here we are 13 years later in 2020, and they're still doing business with child sex traffickers. Now, the New York State, just in case you think, oh, well, maybe they didn't know that Jeffrey Epstein had already been convicted as a child sex trafficker. No, they knew, because the New York State Department of Financial Services that levied that $150 million fine against Deutsche Bank said that they had proof Deutsche bankers considered Epstein, quote unquote, high risk, and that they had indisputable proof that Deutsche bankers knew of his history of sex trafficking and child abuse. So continuing to do business with him, despite knowing this, led literally maybe to hundreds, at least dozens of more children being sexually trafficked. And so these bankers at Deutsche Bank that did this, you can consider them as pure evil. It's not hyperbolic to call them pure evil, because they are directly responsible for aiding and abetting in the sex trafficking of dozens of more children that they enabled Epstein to do this. Because, put it this way, if any child, like I don't have children, but if I had children and a child of mine, or any child, I discovered any child of any friend of mine was subjected to abuse by Jeffrey Epstein because of the actions of Deutsche Bank bankers, well, put it this way, I would pay a visit to that home of that banker, and that banker would not be happy at the outcome of my visit. Okay, so let's move on. So we can't, before I move on, we can't let other people associated with Epstein off the hook. Because who also met after Epstein, after it was well known publicly that he was a child sex trafficker and pedophile? Billionaire Bill Gates, for one, who lied about the extent of his relationship, saying, oh, I just met Jeffrey Epstein in passing. But yet it had been documented at least just two times we know about, there may have been more, that he spent, they said, hours into the early morning hours at Jeffrey Epstein's home in New York. That doesn't sound like someone you just know in passing, okay? And then also, former head of private wealth management at JP Morgan, the current head of Barclays Bank, Staley, also met with Jeffrey Epstein multiple times after he was a convicted pedophile. And does that surprise me? No, because why? At Barclays Bank, we had Daniel James Plunkett, who fixed the price of gold just to and slammed the price of gold lower in order to avoid a Barclays Bank payment due to that client of $3.9 million that would have had to have been paid out because that client had an option on gold futures at a certain price that was profitable until Daniel James Plunkett slammed the price of gold. And this is crazy because this happened in 2013. Who was Plunkett? Plunkett was the director of the precious metals desk at Barclays Bank. And guess what he said? He said when he was convicted that other bankers at Barclays Bank taught him how to fix the price of gold lower. So that means that the whole, I think Staley was still the CEO of Barclays Bank then, the whole narrative he spread, oh, this is just a rogue banker, it's complete bullshit. Because Plunkett testified that other bankers taught him how to do that. So if they were teaching him how to slam gold prices lower in the futures market, that meant other Barclays bankers had done it, and that was not an isolated case, and that he was not a rogue banker that just did this on a one-time basis at Barclays Bank, and that Staley was a complete liar as well. So again, the scary thing, which wasn't even discussed in the media, that one banker, that was one person was able to slam the prices of gold lower. That shows you how fraudulent the futures markets in New York and London are, which I'm going to talk about. So make sure you listen to SK Wealth Academy podcast number 114, which I haven't released yet, because I'm going to tell you and discuss some of the manners in which they do that, and it's still going on today. Okay, so let's move on to the next story. Now, this story has to do with the Paycheck Protection Program, PPP, which this only applies to Americans because that was created to help small businesses survive through the unnecessary pandemic lockdown. And specifically, it was federal loan relief for small businesses with fewer than 500 employees. But Associated Press reported earlier this week that at least 75 publicly traded companies, some with thousands of employees, applied fraudulently under this program and received multi-million dollar loans. Among these were Shake Shack, which applied for a $10 million loan and received it before they were publicly shamed into returning it, because Shake Shack has well over the maximum employee limit. Ruth's Chris Steakhouse as well. Potbelly, Taco Cabana, all have thousands of employees, and they were not the only companies. There are other large publicly traded companies that qualified this by gaming the system. Basically, they applied through subsidiaries of their parent company to qualify for that less than 500 employee limit. You could even just make up if you didn't have a subsidiary that only had like 100 employees, and you could be a company that had 10,000 employees and apply and receive those loans. So again, this shows you the parasitic mentality of big global corporations. Because where's that money coming from? It's coming from the American taxpayer, and they're gaming the system to get free money. And the Associated Press reported at least 94 publicly traded companies received money targeted to help small businesses survive. And unfortunately, in that same article, they talked about small businesses that were locked out of receiving that money. So there were, I don't know what type of business they ran, but in the article it said small business owners Kendra Baker and Zachary Davis of Santa Cruz, California, were forced to lay off 70 workers because they applied for these monies, and because of the parasitic greed of huge corporations that sucked up this money that was not intended for them, they received none of the money. And other institutions that are very parasitic, we all know the Ivy League institutions are all parasitic monsters. Harvard University also applied for federal relief aid through the CARE Act, which is Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, and they received $8,655,748. And the government said, oh, you have to spend at least 50% of that for financial aid grants to students. But get this, Harvard has the largest endowment of any university in America, and probably in the entire world. Their endowment is $40 billion. But Harvard says, no, we don't want to take $8 million or $9 million, which is a small, tiny fraction of $40 billion out of our own money that we have. Let's take it from the U.S. taxpayer. Let's be the leeches we are. Now, Donald Trump said Harvard has to pay this back, because Harvard didn't deserve that money. It was not the institution, President Trump said, that these monies were intended for. And though I don't like President Trump, I told you I'm always a critical thinker, and it doesn't matter if I don't like a person. When a person does something right, I will commend them for that. So though I don't like Donald Trump, a lot of his policies as U.S. president, I don't think he's a particularly enlightened person, and that's putting it very lightly when it comes to race issues. In this case, Trump is 100% correct, and he should be commended for saying that Harvard University is a bunch of leeches and they should give that money back. But I don't want to just condemn Harvard, because Columbia University and Cornell University actually received larger amounts than Harvard. They received $12.8 million each. Yale received slightly lower than Harvard, $7 million, and Princeton University received $2.5 million from this CARE Act. And these are all amongst the most privileged, wealthiest universities in America. Okay, so the last point I want to go over is Social Security. Now, Social Security in the United States, otherwise, it's known under different different names in different nations. So every nation, basically every developed nation has this kind of program where they withdraw money from your paycheck and then give it back to you in retirement. Australia has it, UK has it, all these other nations have it. But in America, the trustees of the Social Security Fund noted this past April that net inflows into that fund will turn negative just next year. So they said the trust fund will go broke in 2035, which means it will have no money by the time I am eligible to receive funds as a retiree. So I've always said it's a scam. I remember in my last company that I had, I wrote a newsletter to my clients saying your Social Security in the United States is a complete scam. Not only for the fact that it doesn't give you back inflation adjusted amounts of the money taken from your paychecks, it only gives you the nominal amount. So by the time it returns it to you 30, 40, 50 years later, they really need to return to you like 20 times the amount they took from you in order to adjust for the tremendous loss of purchasing power. Or at a minimum, I would say at least 10 times as much as they extracted from us, but they only return the nominal amount. So that, in that regard, it's a complete scam. And it's also a complete scam that although it's supposed to be kept in a separate allocated fund, what happened, why it's broke, because of course, if you're putting money into it, all the money should be there, right? It should be like a bank savings account. But we all know banks act like hedge funds today. They don't act like banks to protect the money that we deposit into them. Same thing with the Social Security Fund. They basically were taking, the state was taking money out of the Social Security Fund to spend it in other manners that had nothing to do with Social Security. So that's why there's going to be no money left. So I had said for years that I plan to get zero money back from Social Security. I'm not planning on any of that for my retirement. And I don't think it's sad as it is to say that we all know that the state is totalitarian. They could care less if nobody gets their money back. I mean, I think they will, but it doesn't matter, because if they have to create trillions of US dollars out of thin air in order to fund the Social Security Fund, guess who still loses? Us. Because remember I told you that they only return the nominal amount, not the inflation adjusted amount. And by doing that, then they're going to degrade the amount. It's like if I borrowed $50 from you today, would you just want $50 back 50 years from now? Of course not. You would say, hey, I'm going to do the inflation adjustment. You have to pay me back like $375 to be equivalent to the purchasing power 50 years down the road of $50 today. So by creating more money to fund a Social Security Fund that will have zero money, is projected to have zero money in it in 2035, then people say, oh, of course, they'll never go broke because the U.S. Central Bank will just print more money to fund it so everyone can be paid in retirement. But guess what? Instead of being paid back $375, borrowing that $50, you should now be paid back $1,000. It's going to just degrade the purchasing power of the money return. So it's still, you shouldn't count on that money being worth anything by the time it's returned to us, because that's the only alternative, right? By the time it's returned to us, it's going to be worth like 2% of the purchasing power of when they took it, extracted it from our paycheck. So that's how it goes. You should also look into this country, this same situation in your own nation if you don't live in America, because I'm sure a lot of other nations are also broke, and that this is going to be a problem in the future for those of you where retirement is still 30, 40, 50 years away. Don't plan on getting any of that money back. I shouldn't be laughing because it's really sad, but I've never planned for that money because I don't really think it's going to be worth anything by the time it's returned to me. Okay, so that wraps up the first edition of the financial news of the horrific and the parasitic. Please comment below. Let me know what you think of these topics. And as always, remain intensely curious. And don't forget, I will be uploading podcast number 113, 114, and 115 soon. Take care.